So first of all, who am I? My name's Bruce Crowther. I'm the founder of the Fair Trade Towns, the International Fair Trade Towns movement, and now currently I'm actually the director for the Fig Tree Centre, and I'm speaking to you now from the new centre, which is in Dolphinholme, just outside Garstang, the world's first fair trade town. I was originally a vet, and I qualified in 1985. Which was the year of Live Aid. And you guys will all be too young to remember what Live Aid was, but it was a big international concert, the first time ever when the whole world did a concert together, a musical concert, to raise money for the Ethiopia famine. And that at that time didn't just raise money, but it raised awareness of international poverty, global poverty. So I became involved with Oxfam. When I moved to Garstang in 1992, I set up the Garstang Oxfam group. And we very rapidly became involved with promoting fair trade. Garstang is a very small rural market town in Lancashire, which is in the northwest of England. In the early days of campaigning on fair trade, we weren't very successful, and I had this idea to invite all the people we were failing with to a meal to get them to support fair trade. And then I had this idea that if they all supported fair trade, which eventually we got them doing so, we would in fact have created a fair trade town. So I'm going to talk to you now in much more detail about the fair trade town story and how they set up and changed the world. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about how and why fair trade towns started in Garstang, and then how they spread across the globe, and then looking at Garstang and the link they have with New Koforidua in Ghana, and a little bit about the fig tree itself, and then about our fair trade and slave trade project. And then finally, just to mention my book, which has just been written, called Not in My Lifetime, a Fair Trade Campaigner's Journal. Most of you have probably come across the chocolate called Divine, or Divine chocolate. It's a fair trade chocolate. Very special because it's not just fair trade, it's actually owned by the producers in Ghana, cocoa producers. They actually own the company that make the chocolate as well. And on the wrapper, they've got what they call Adinkra symbols. These are Ghanaian symbols. They all have a meaning. And this is one of those Adinkra symbols, which we'll see on the wrapper of Divine chocolate. This one is called Sankofa. And Sankofa in the local language of Twi in Ghana means return and get it. It means to learn from our past. It means we can all learn from our history, from what's gone before. And throughout history, whether it be the abolition of the British Atlantic slave trade, or indeed things like the end of apartheid in South Africa, it has always been ordinary people that have been behind making this change happen. Admittedly, the politicians are often the ones that take the credit. And undoubtedly, when you look at the British Atlantic slave trade, the services of William Wilberforce, in the British Parliament, was paramount to the abolition of slave trade. But the important thing was it was ordinary men and women gathering evidence and petitions on the streets that provided Wilberforce with the materials he needed. Likewise, after the fall of apartheid in South Africa, I remember well Nelson Mandela thanking and congratulating the many millions of people around the world that made it happen with their collective action. So it's ordinary people that really make change happen, not the great politicians that often take the credit for it. And that's true with what happened with Garstang. It was the Fair Trade Towns movement came to be in Garstang because it was the Garstang Oxfam group who ignited that first spark. We held our first meeting in 1992, which was attended by just 3 people. There was myself, who was the chair, there was my wife, and our babysitter. And I'd like to say that we set out to create an international movement for change, but I'd be lying. What it was that I, at that time, through Oxfam and because of Live Aid, I'd learned that we live in a world where a small child dies every 3 seconds from poverty. And much worse than that is the fact that this is preventable. And therefore, to my mind, this was and still is totally unacceptable because it can be prevented. It's man-made and we can do something about it very easily if we put our will to do so. When I'm learning this fact, I felt we all needed to do something about it. So the Garstang Oxfam members at that time, just the 3 of us, all wanted to do something to change this. But it wasn't easy in those early days. We were quite frustrated. We couldn't even get local churches using fair trade products, never mind anybody else. But we persevered, and if anything, it was that early frustration, despair that helped fuel our passion and motivation that eventually led us to success. I'm sure I can imagine that many of you now listening in to this presentation feel the same about the world today, whether it be about climate change, racism, poverty, or any of the many issues that affect our lives. And perhaps you also believe that there's nothing you can do about it. But there is hope when you consider that a meeting of just 3 people in a small rural town like Garstang can lead to an international movement for change. So if you believe in something, go for it. Even if it may seem like you're the only one who actually cares, go for it and do what you can to try and change it. And in case of Garstang, we eventually did achieve success. At a public meeting following the meal that I mentioned, in April 2000, the people of Garstang voted to make their town the world's first fair trade town. At this point, it was just a declaration we'd made. What did it mean? We'd made this bold declaration, but what did it actually mean for anybody else who wanted to maybe follow Garstang's example? So what we did, we worked then with the Fair Trade Foundation, which was the body in the UK that looked after the fair trade mark, to develop the 5 goals that were needed in order for other places to become fair trade towns in the UK. And those 5 goals were as follows. First of all, we have the local council passing a resolution supporting fair trade and agreeing to procure fair trade products. That was the important thing, actually taking the action to agree to use fair trade products. Secondly, we need to make it possible for products to be readily accessible in the area of shops and catering establishments. It doesn't mean that everybody is using fair trade, but it means that it's possible to go and get a cup of fair trade coffee in a cafe, you know where you can go and get one, or to be able to buy it in the shops. And thirdly, fair trade products need to be used by workplaces, not places who could sell them, but places that could use them. So workplaces and community organizations, and this includes faith groups or schools or workplaces. Fourthly, we needed to attract support and media coverage for the campaign. It's no good doing all these things and then not telling everybody in the town that you know what you're doing, so that people in the town actually know that what's going on. And finally, there needs to be a steering committee in the town to ensure that commitment to fair trade town status stays, and in order to get renewals as time goes on, in order to get those renewals. So those were the 5 goals that were first developed in order to other people to follow suit. And those 5 goals were designed to involve the whole community. As such, the steering group needs to have representatives right from across that community. This is the Fair Trade Town Group from a place called Springfield, which is located somewhere in the USA. You might have heard of it before. And as you can see, everybody's involved in Springfield on the Fair Trade Steering Committee. We've got the local businessman involved, Mr. Burns here. We've got the local police force involved. We've got the local pub owner and the schools, not just the teachers, but the pupils as well, all involved in the steering committee for Springfield. So one of the greatest strengths of fair trade towns is that they do involve the whole community. They're not just about local authorities or just about faith groups or just about universities. They're about all of these places and a lot more. And even when you have separate campaigns, for example, fair trade school campaigns as we have now, or faith groups, fair trade churches or fair trade mosques or fair trade universities, even without those places should be involved in a good fair trade town campaign. So what all this means is that being a fair trade town is about you, not the person sitting next to you or your neighbor or anybody else, but you, every single one of you. Whatever job you do, however you spend your leisure time, whatever school or college you or your children go to, or whatever church or mosque you go to, or whatever, or any other way that you're involved, you can be involved with the Fair Trade Town campaign. It's about you. We say that Fair Trade Towns is a form of soft advocacy through involving several stakeholders in a community that work across the world. So once those 5 goals were developed, they became the core goals to enable fair trade towns not just to set up in the UK, but also right across the world. And at the moment, we currently have 2,081 fair trade town groups in 34 countries across the globe. The International Fair Trade Towns map that we have here shows and this is available on the Fair Trade Towns for people to see on the International Fair Trade Towns website. And as you can see, these have got all the countries and the numbers of the fair trade towns in each country. Currently, Germany has the largest number of fair trade towns with a total of 723 fair trade towns in the country. And it is truly a global movement with fair trade towns stretching across all 6 continents. And one of my favorites is Lebanon, where despite all the problems that they have with the refugees, a third of the country is made up of refugees. Then they had the blast last year that hit the port of Beirut. And they're suffering great problems. But despite all that, they've managed to embrace the Fair Trade Towns initiative and now have 9 fair trade villages in Lebanon. Then we go over to Seoul with a population of almost 10 million people in Seoul, in South Korea. It's the largest fair trade city in the world. So it goes right across from small villages right up to huge capital cities. So in Garstang, we then went on to form a direct link with the cocoa farming community of New Koforidua in Ghana, which they were inspired by Garstang to go on to become the first fair trade town in Africa, which is something we were very pleased of. And in New Koforidua, we built this house, what we call the Cooperative House, which is a place where people can go and visit. So any of you guys who want to go over to Ghana and live in a cocoa farming community for a while, you can go and stay in this house, quite reasonable rates, and get to know the cocoa farming community. So that was something that was very special to us. It was a community house that would serve the community themselves, but also, and have a library, but also it was somewhere where people from other countries can go and visit and learn about fair trade on site of a cocoa farming community. And in some ways, that's inspired us with them having their community centre, their fair trade centre. I decided to set up the Fig Tree, which was in 2011, which had a cafe and a museum and exhibition on fair trade and telling the story of fair trade towns. And it's a place where we could actually also hold our fair trade chocolate workshops, where I had this idea where children could actually make chocolate in the classroom and by that learn about fair trade by learning about the farmers who provided the cocoa that went into the chocolate that they were making. Okay. From that, when we suddenly realized when we got into more of a financial situation and we needed an income, I thought, well, okay, we're going into classrooms making chocolate. We have the ability to know how to make chocolate. So we started making our own bean to bar chocolate. And I have to say, we've got quite good at it now. One of my proudest moments was, despite Brexit, which happened in the UK in 2016, the vote took many years for it to actually be implemented, which is shocking. But despite Brexit coming out in 2016 at the referendum, we're most proud that our chocolate, our special edition cinnamon and orange chocolate, was given to delegates attending the EU Fair Trade Breakfast organised by the Fair Trade Advocacy Office in 2017. So that's a very proud moment for us. Also, following Seoul's declaration as a fair trade city in 2018, we were most proud to have Fig Tree chocolate sold in the fair trade city hall of Seoul, as you can see here on this picture. Again, incredible that our chocolate should be sold halfway across the world like that. And because of our direct link with producers in New Koforidua, we're very proud to be able to name the farmer, the actual farmer who's grown the cocoa that goes in each batch of our chocolate. So when somebody buys a bar of chocolate off us, we can say, this is Frederick, he's grown the cocoa that's gone into that chocolate, or this is Patricia. We're very proud cocoa farmers like Patricia and Frederick, who are central to our campaigning message. And I've always been, with our campaign, we've always been very proud to be able to say that if somebody asks us a question on fair trade that we can't answer, we can directly talk to the cocoa farmers in New Koforidua. So that's the importance of our link and be able to answer people's questions for them. So we already had a link with Ghana, then through fair trade, and Garstang being the first fair trade town in the world. And near to Garstang is a place called Lancaster, which was the fourth biggest slave trade port in the UK about 200 years ago. So in the year 2000, we developed our Fair Trade Slave Trade project, which was focused on those two trading systems, fair trade being a modern trading system that benefited the people of Ghana, and slave trade being an historic system that was detrimental to the people of Ghana. And the way I see what we were doing was carrying on the work of those the slave trade abolitionists about 200 years ago. These were the people that not just pioneered the slave trade abolition campaign in the UK, but pretty much they were pioneers of campaigning as we know it today, coming up with all sorts of ideas, women on the streets getting petitions signed. This is at a time when not only did women not have the vote, they weren't even allowed into meeting places to discuss any important issues. And yet they were on the streets getting petitions signed and doing marches in order to get people to support the abolition. So actually quite incredible, really, how far ahead they were of their time and how, like I say, they pioneered methods that we still use today. So I want to finish the presentation now with just 4 quotes that we've got. This one here is from the slave trade abolitionists themselves. It says, "It is simply immoral that people should be allowed to suffer in order to provide us with luxuries such as tea, coffee, and sugar at a cheap price." That was their message 200 years ago. And unfortunately, those words are still true today. But I'm not just referring to modern day slavery, but to the fact that there are producers in Ghana growing cocoa for our chocolate who do not even have access to clean drinking water, let alone education or healthcare. This today is simply immoral, and therefore we must do something to change it. We're still living in a world where a small child dies every 3 seconds through poverty. But what makes this totally unacceptable is that it is man-made, and therefore it's preventable. If it's a man-made problem, we can prevent it from happening. At the Make Poverty History Rally in Trafalgar Square in London in 2005, Nelson Mandela said, "Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings." So why should we change the world? It's quite simply because it is wrong. And even if, like the slave trade 200 years ago, so much of it is totally acceptable to our society, we still must go out to try and change it because we know it's just wrong. But changing the world is not easy. I often remind myself that no matter how hard it has all been, no matter how painful it can be, it is all worth it in the end. And I say, if you bang your head against the brick wall for long enough, it will eventually fall. But remember, it will leave you with one heck of a headache. If we persevere, we can and we will achieve our dreams. And the last quote is from Archbishop Oscar Romero, who said the simple words, "We can all do something, therefore we must all do something." We are able to do something about a problem, therefore we have to act against problems that are so immoral. In my lifetime, I've always been dismissed as an idealist. In my earlier campaigning days with Oxfam, I was certain that one day we would see an end to apartheid in South Africa. And people used to say I was completely crazy. There's no way that this is going to happen. But even I did not believe it would happen in my lifetime. My children, who are now a lot older, when they were at school, were learning about apartheid in their history lessons. That's a change that people said couldn't happen, and yet it has happened. And I'm just as confident, I'm just as certain today that just like apartheid, poverty in the world will eventually come to an end. But I must admit, it probably is not likely to happen in my lifetime.